This is the normal world. You go to work in a city. All around you are enormous new buildings. They look alike. But you will never be able to afford to live in them, because they are not really homes. They are blocks of money, bought by global investors whose money has nowhere else to go. Brexit happened. It showed that all the people who are supposed to tell you about the world, the journalists, the politicians, the think tank experts, know nothing.
Greetings, comrades, friends, and enemies. This is the Michael Brooks Show. I am Michael Brooks. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Lech.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic in the digitosphere, in the ever-growing, ever-expanding TMBS universe. On this week's program, Alex Pareene returns, the great journalist, to talk about the collapse of the American elites, the amoral parade of decadence, Brett Kavanaugh, Donald Trump. Plus, what would the Democratic Party do if it actually wanted to win? What does that strategy look like? Maybe statehood for Washington, D.C., maybe voting rights for Puerto Rico. All that and much more with Alex Pareene. Plus, Bernie Sanders outlines a legit global left vision, hot off the heels of our conversation with Daniel Bessner last week.
It's called Posadism.
It's called Wait for Aliens to Come Down. Read the climate report. We're totally fucked. No, he had a more optimistic message than that on confronting global oligarchy, reorienting from global empire, and rights and justice for all. That, plus Matt Lech regulates. Griscom talks economics, still defying the orders of Richard Wolff. We have a whole lot to get to in the postgame, including the gulag, because that's where it goes now. But I will tell you that Nikki Haley, the ever rightward, ever warmongering, ever Trump enabling, but of course called a moderate because, I don't know, she didn't spit at the Palestinian delegation at the UN. Nikki Haley has resigned, and we will be talking about that and placing her where she belongs in the post game.
She's also ever self-described lucky girl. That's what she said this morning. You can play that clip later if you want.
Jesus Christ. All that and much, much more on the Michael Brooks Show this week. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I am fighting a bit of a cold. I apologize. And I want to thank, before we get to it, those of you, some of the TMBS army, and a huge amount of the Count the Dings militia was at the Bell House in Brooklyn on Friday night, where I was a featured guest along with Bomani Jones and Pablo and some other great people at the Count the Ding show. I did a panel at Waz. Amin and I did an Obama impression contest, which I clearly won. Much respect to Amin, but I mean, let's keep it real. Welcome to those of you who might be new to the show, fresh off of that show. We
let us know.
Bell House. Yeah, definitely let us know. And all love, as always, to our comrades over at Count the Dings. And we have some new plans actually coming for Woke Bros, which we'll be letting you know about soon as well.
If you're a person that comes to the show through an avenue that's not the Majority Report, like I'm especially interested in the sports bros from the Waz Enterprises. Yes. I'm curious, just to know whence you came.
They're there. They're definitely, yes. We are curious. Absolutely. So we got to talk about Brazil. We've been covering Brazil for a while now, from the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva, the most important political prisoner in the world today, to the use of an anti-corruption politics being leveraged by the far right. And now we saw in this past weekend's elections the terrifyingly close, almost outright first round win by Jair Bolsonaro, the fascist candidate who leads in Brazil's elections. We've talked about how horrible he is before, and there needs to be a greater strategy, obviously, to confront him and everything that he and Trump and the whole rest of the cabal of them represent. But let's do a little bit of a re-review of just who this person is. We'll start with a photo of Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo. This is him with Steve Bannon. He tweeted this yesterday, I believe, or over the weekend. It was a pleasure to meet Steve Bannon, strategist in Donald Trump's presidential campaign. We had great conversations, and we share the same worldview. He said to be an enthusiast of Bolsonaro's campaign, and we are certainly in touch to join forces, especially against cultural Marxism. For those of you who question why this show makes an effort to be as global as we do, not only for the rightness of the cause of serious labor politics, social democracy, combating police violence in Brazil just as we do in the United States, and the political imprisonment of a world-renowned labor leader and the greatest president in Brazil's history, we also do it because we recognize, like the fascists recognize, that these are globally synchronized, tightly interconnected events, and that so goes the most powerful nation in Latin America has an implication for us. This is why during the hegemonic reign of the Third Way in the late 1990s and the early aughts, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Gerhard Schroeder, and other neoliberal privatizing, jettisoning, New Deal, and social democracy centrists globally coordinated because they wanted to set a global pattern. That's what Steve Bannon is attempting to do. We're going to get back to the Yasha Monk thing in a second. I now also want to play this clip of Dilma Rousseff. This is an interview she did with Democracy Now! In 2016. She, of course, her impeachment on budget irregularities was a major part of the process of what we see happening today in Brazil. But she spoke specifically about Jair Bolsonaro dedicating his vote in the Congress to impeach her to the man who tortured her. See, Dilma Rousseff was a guerrilla fighter against Brazil's military dictatorship, and she was tortured by a notorious torturer. Bolsonaro dedicated his vote to remove her from office to the man who tortured her. This is former President Dilma Rousseff explaining that in 2016 to Amy Goodman.
Yes, I can indeed. The far right in Brazil, like the far right everywhere, is anti-woman, anti-black, anti-indigenous persons, and it is in favor of ending all oversight. And they struggled for this. They want to end any oversight of labor work situations analogous to slavery that continue to exist in Brazil. They are full of prejudice and intolerance, and they believe that they can resolve the most complex problems using brute force of violence, open violence. What happened in the vote in the impeachment process that I suffered, well, legislator Bolsonaro cast his vote paying tribute to the military dictatorship and torture, and the torturer, whose name was Carlos Alberto Prihante Ultra, in casting his vote, he paid tribute to this man who was a torturer in Sao Paulo, and he was recognized in all of the processes of truth and justice that unfolded in Brazil. He said the following to pay tribute to someone who brought terror to President Dilma Rousseff, a person who is capable during an impeachment proceeding to justify his vote in this manner is a person who sows hatred. He spreads hatred because he only understands one language.
So that was Dilma Rousseff. And as Noam Chomsky recently pointed out after visiting Lula, to Brazil's power structure, imprisoning Lula is not enough. They want to ensure the population, as it prepares to vote, cannot hear from him at all. And they're apparently willing to use any mechanism to accomplish that goal. The irony is, of course, that for years, the Workers' Party governed in a moderate social democratic manner that paid off IMF loans, that was courteous and courting of global capital, not just from the United States, however, also with agreements with China, Iran as well, which certainly would not please the United States, as well as, of course, programs that I always say that significantly reduced poverty and empowered workers, and also did some small steps, though not enough, to protect the Amazon and the global environment, of which Bolsonaro has threatened to overturn those steps as well. The real key question here, though, and one, again, that has implications for all of us, especially if, as an example, somehow Bernie Sanders becomes the Democratic nominee in 2020, is where do we sit with liberals in the global struggle against fascism? There are some on what we call the dumb left who are almost welcoming of fascism to expose the hypocrisy of neoliberalism. This is both politically catastrophic, historically illiterate, and morally unhinged. That, however, there's a major division inside liberals that, as Jean Bajelon, contributor to this show and professor at Missouri State University, has noted many times. Do liberals think that Marxism is the threat to democracy, quote-unquote democracy, or the left, or do they understand that fascism is? Are they so attached to elitism, manners, and capitalism that they're willing to jettison everything else in the pursuit of those concerns at the expense of everything else? Brazil's elite is showing that they absolutely are willing to jettison those concerns. And in fact, a guy like Lula would have governed. First of all, he would have won this race. He was leading with a comfortable double-digit lead over Bolsonaro. He would have governed as a great national reconciler. He would have, yes, started to reverse austerity and do things for the poor, but he also would have done good things for the investment environment. They rejected that because of an irrational hatred of him, rooted, I think, no doubt, in class resentments, that somebody who had no education, that somebody who was a metal worker, that somebody who didn't have the elite training was more intelligent and globally recognized and accomplished than they are. Enrique Cardoso, the former president of Brazil, who was an arch neoliberal and friend of the Third Way, has publicly announced that he will not commit to endorsing Haddad over Bolsonaro in the second round of voting, even though Jair Bolsonaro, in one of his greatest hits, in addition to telling a woman legislator that she wasn't attractive enough to rape, to talking about disowning and maybe even beating and whipping children if they were gay, said that the problem with the military dictatorship is that they didn't kill enough people, they tortured too many people. And one of the top people they had to kill was Enrique Cardoso. Now, Cardoso would not even commit to voting against Bolsonaro. This is the sickness of a certain type of liberal elite whose end of the day allegiance is to capital and social standing and not democracy. And it also shows up in delusional, fatuous false equivalencies. This is Yasha Monk, a tweet from him. Yasha Monk has worked for Tony Blair at his Institute on Renewing an Open Society. He's been a fellow at Harvard. He has written and writes extensively on the threat of authoritarianism. Ironically, many of his solutions to those problems are social democratic, but he has no desire to actually do anything that would allow for those solutions to actually be implemented, namely take back democracy. This is what he put out yesterday. I don't know if we have this tweet up. For about a decade, Latin America seemed to be turning away from populism and authoritarianism. This trend is now running in reverse. If Bolsonaro wins, leaders with authoritarian leanings will rule two of the continent's most populous and important countries, Brazil and Mexico. That's right. He just compared López Obrador, AMLO, the next president of Mexico, who ran a moderate, populist, anti-corruption, though left-wing, human rights-oriented campaign, who successfully governed Mexico City, who has never talked about killing indigenous people, who has never made racist comments, who's never talked about raping a legislator, who's never talked about whipping a gay child, who has said that his main aim is to deal with poverty. But apparently, Yasha Monk's delusional worldview is willing to equate these things in an insane, misleading false equivalency. if we are to save democracy in Brazil, and this election, the second round is on the 28th of October, is no doubt going to need a broad, united front, of which the other center-left candidates, Ciro Gomes and others, have already committed to supporting the Workers' Party candidate Haddad in stopping fascism. The centrist party of Cardoso has said that they will remain neutral, although partially there are some strategic calculations behind that. And Enrique Cardoso himself has revealed himself as a total immoral monster of the first order. Those of us on the left need to recognize that our prime enemies are those on the right. Here's another example of this. This is a photo taken of... explain who this is, David.
It's one of the members of Bolsonaro's party, who I believe won.
He won a seat in Congress.
Yeah, and so there he is. He's ripping up a campaign sign of Marielle Franco, and then
Marielle Franco was the city councilor for the Socialist Party, for a socialist party, who was assassinated 6 months ago in a professional hit. Her and her driver were murdered. Her killers have still not been apprehended. He's tearing up one of her signs. This happened within a couple of days ago. Lula's traveling bus in the spring, before he went to prison in politically trumped up charges, was shot at. So we need to recognize that right now in an emergency situation, defeating fascism is of the first order. There's no coming back from that. There's no second order to that. But we also need to realize that liberals who play any false equivalency now and value their standing over democracy, we can't call them right-word or liberal anymore. They're simply polite fascists and fundamentally part of the danger and the problem. And that's what we'll see play out in Brazil over the next couple of weeks as we continue to have solidarity and hope that this election can be pulled out, with Fernando Haddad defeating Jair Bolsonaro. And a broad, vague anti-corruption politics will never lead us where we need to go. Do we want to do this now? We were going to do it in the post-game. Let's do it now.
I think you should do it now, yeah.
Okay. And this is partially what I'm talking about here. Then this is relevant. I don't actually talk about Jimmy Dore much on this show. I talked about him once, a couple months ago, because he was passive-aggressively saying some stuff about a panel I was on. And someone brought this video to my attention, though, and I'm stunned, honestly, because I would at least want to give Jimmy credit. I've seen him saying, hey, well, you should question the official he says question the official narrative in Syria in ways that are totally wrong, stupid, conspiratorial, and overlook war crimes. But, I don't know, overlook official narratives in Venezuela, which for all my immense criticisms of Maduro, I think is extremely important. We always need to look at the U.S. hand in Venezuela and, of course, in attacking the left across Latin America. I haven't seen Jimmy say anything about Brazil, but apparently he put this video out a year ago. If you notice something, this video starts in the middle of basically an infomercial for the lawyers who did the car wash investigation, which ended with Lula being put in prison. Let's play this.
Lava Jato, it's okay for no corruption.
Lava Jato has become a work of art itself, with broad support of the public. Lava Jato bumper stickers are everywhere. Judge Moro has become a folk hero, and Delton has a best-selling book on the operation.
I wrote this book to say that we are not heroes in this case, and car wash case is only the first step.
Lava Jato is an attitude in Brazil now. It's a ray of hope, and it's an example for young prosecutors, young judges, that they can make a difference. We hope that we have success in the legal procedures, but the success of changing the mindset is already happening.
We live in a window of opportunity for changes, and we are committed to use any chance, any possibility to make things better in Brazil. And doing so is a matter that is up to everybody.
Wow.
That's kind of I don't know. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I want to get a Lava Jato T-shirt.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I really want one.
So Lava Jato, that's car wash, I guess, in whatever. They speak Spanish, but I think they speak Portuguese, right? Portuguese.
All right. I don't want to be too much of an asshole about the last part and overlook the actual point here. Okay. And this is what we mean by aimless, vague, depoliticized, quote-unquote, populism. What did Car Wash actually reveal? Well, Car Wash undoubtedly revealed massive corruption across Brazilian politics, although it was weaponized to target one party. A party, the Workers' Party, which is simply not designed purely as a patronage system for corruption. A lot of the other parties involved in it literally were. But I'm going to quote now from Brian Mayer of Brazil Wire. It's no secret that American corporations have immensely benefited from Operation Car Wash, the international corruption investigation that was initiated in partnership between the U.S. Department of Justice, the SEC, the local public prosecutor's office in Curitiba, Pareene, and the Brazilian External Police. American petroleum corporations such as ExxonMobil and Chevron are benefiting from the Michel Temer government's systemic dismantling and privatization. Temer is the right-wing vice president who stabbed Dilma Rousseff in the back, who has multiple corruption allegations against him, including ones that are infinitely more substantiated than anything presented about Lula. He's the current president of Brazil, implementing a vicious austerity plan, which has thrown millions back into poverty and is rolling back labor rights as part of this beautiful new mindset that Car Wash opened up in Brazil. The government's systemic dismantling and privatization at below market rates of Petrobras and its massive offshore oil reserves, and with MP 795, a law which will give $300 billion in tax abatements to foreign companies extracting Brazilian petroleum. Then goes on to talk about how Boeing and other companies benefit from this and how this connects to Hillary Clinton's support for the 2009 coup in Honduras. So that judge, Sergio Moro, who had the soft music under him in the clip, has been actually publicly castigated for leaking multiple recordings in an attempt to embarrass Worker Party members illegally. Not supposed to do this, outside of his remit. Several months ago, when one regional court judge ordered that Lula be released from prison, Sergio Moro refused to comply with the order in another act of illegality. Last weekend, he released another tape recording in an effort to hurt the Workers' Party, which now, as we know, is literally the only choice between fascism and democracy in Brazil. But I guess it's part of this new beautiful mindset. Briefly more from Brian Mayer. The following timeline is meant to further public understanding and relationship between the U.S. Department of Justice to 2016 and the political imprisonment of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, which, as Glenn Greenwald points out, was obviously done to prevent him from running for the presidency this year, in a situation in which he is still the frontrunner in spite of being held in solitary confinement and illegally prevented from giving interviews for the past 4 months. So, my fucking suggestion is that you do a little bit of fucking area research. And you read a little bit about how actually Operation Car Wash was part of a right-wing fucking plan and strategy leveraged to defeat social democracy and labor unions and create a political prisoner in fucking Brazil. Or, I don't know, maybe we just want to be useful idiots for fascists globally.
Yeah, I would suggest that if someone's... I mean, not that fighting corruption's a bad thing, but if someone's suggesting that their fighting corruption is going to make life better for the average person on the street, and they're not talking anything about redistribution or things like that, then they're probably not somebody you should just trust because they have...
What is corruption?
Exactly.
Well, it's like, that's the question. Is like whenever you hear somebody talking about these kind of like general concepts, like, you know, like justice in the abstract, like the question you have to ask is justice for whom? And it's very clear who this service of justice has been benefiting, which has been the right wing, American corporations, and people who are political enemies of Lula. And
also it's been used actually to target left leaders across Latin America.
Without a doubt, yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, these things are definitely very targeted, and it's something that's, you know, we really need to make sure, especially people who are claim to be on the left, to be a little bit smarter about that, because this is something that has been used historically across the board, these kind of bold claims for these universal values or these, you know, systematic understandings, like we don't see these things as individual. Well, no, there are power structures behind all of these things, and it's important to recognize what is motivating, what is making these movements happen. And clearly what we can see in Brazil is that, you know, a popular democratically elected leader and then someone who's leading in the polls was prevented from taking power to give an opportunity to the right wing, which threw the entire Workers' Party into complete disarray.
Right. And look, and if you want to have a left critique of the Workers' Party, it's one of, you know, demobilization of their base and of making arrangements with existing corrupt orders, which is the fundamental problem of any oligarchic capitalist society. But this populism that has these generalized moral statements and vague complaints will be harnessed by the right wing. We literally see this in Italy. The Five Star Movement was a populist party, not left, not right. It had a fusion of some elements of pro-labor, environmental, anti-corporate order with some willingness to be very reactionary and racist on issues of immigration. They've partnered with the Northern League, a full fascist party, and guess who runs that show? Guess who's relevant in that government? That's how this shit works. And you listen to this soft music and all this nonsense. The upshot of that investigation is austerity, the selective use of corruption prosecutions, and paving a way for a guy who says the problem with the military dictatorship was that they tortured too many people and didn't kill enough. Yeah. While you're off just like, yeah, it's fucking corruption.
I mean, to see the game that's being played by some members of the Brazilian elite and Brazilian rich is really, really frightening. To say that you would play this kind of game with an absolute, like, authoritarian, thuggish person just to prevent some very moderate social democratic platforms from being implemented in Brazil. And, you know, there is a good leftist critique of the PT. And it's one of these things when you look at what happened in Brazil, you see that they're not like the elites aren't even willing to compromise on just like the most modest of platforms, because you know that was the hope in Brazil, was that you know you could find some common ground and break through it. But they've been waiting to push this through, and now they have the opportunity, and it's very frightening. And no one on the left, nobody who calls himself a leftist, should take the position that what's happened to Lula is just. I'm sorry.
No, it's disgusting. And anytime some idiot is like, "Oh, so corruption's okay if it's on your side."
Even if everything that Lula's accused of doing is true,
yes,
right? There's no reason that he should be held in solitary confinement with limited visitation, right? There's no reason that he shouldn't be able to run for. There's no reason he should be in prison in the first place.
Period.
Right? And and there's certainly no reason that an entire democratic movement and party and structure should be torn down as punishment for that. That's not justice.
Theoretically, getting an apartment whose main evidence is based off of statements of a businessman keeping himself in jail is flimsy as hell. And yes, more broadly, yes, you know what? In a perfect daffodil-strewn world, Hillary Clinton wouldn't make tens of millions of dollars speaking to Wall Street, and Barack Obama wouldn't make tens of millions of dollars speaking to various corporate interests. And more seriously, former Congress people like Buck McCunin wouldn't be lobbying for Saudi Arabia to commit mass murder in Yemen. And maybe Lula da Silva wouldn't have an apartment. In fact, maybe Brazil, which spends the most after the United States on campaigns and has profoundly corrupted campaign finance laws, would have radically restructured campaign limits, which would also mean you have to break up all sorts of corporate cartels and oligarchies, which they made their peace with in order to win. And by the way, how was that covered in the Western press and the Brazilian press when they did it? Moderation, responsibility, and being shrewd. And now it's talked about as corruption. They could give Lula the whole fucking block. He listed 30, 40 million people out of poverty and is the Democratic choice for president. And if you don't get the fundamentals of what this is, you're too naive and you're too in your own whatever sort of elitist bubblegum comfort world to ever do any kind of politics. Because, this is, I don't know. Yeah. What if Bernie Sanders said something? What if he did inappropriately call some fucking college on behalf of his wife or whatever that silly thing they're trying to make out? What if he did that? People, including good people, sometimes do things that aren't great. And sometimes also people make compromises with pre-existing systems to deliver greater goods. And if you don't get that, I don't know. I hope we can kind of sort of time freeze you in a intro to ethics class in college for your life or eternity.
I mean, to complete the analogy, in that hypothetical situation with Bernie, the solution certainly wouldn't be throw Bernie in in prison in isolation and pull him off of the ballots across the country, right? I mean, like that certainly would not be what we would want to happen.
By the way, if there was a lavajato and if that something like that exists in the United States, what top line politician you think goes to jail first? With the same political motives,
I would. This is an educated guess. I would say Collins, because she has enriched herself the most in her senatorial career out of any sitting senator today.
Ooh, yeah. I make that motherfucking bank, cash money, y'all.
No, I don't know that for sure, but
well, if it went by the Brazil case, it would be Bernie.
It'd be Bernie,
right? It's like
Bernie or Warren. The banks probably have like how many individuals do you think it's their main job to look at like Elizabeth Warren for banks to try to take her down?
Tons, without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, it's just that naive bullshit. Like I can't fucking stand it. I mean, look, I get that it's like distasteful here to have to make a calculation where you vote for Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton sucks. But the same perfectionistic logic doesn't work in that election. But then you have, like, you're going to go out to Brazil, guy who's a fucking political prisoner and leader of democracy and labor rights movement. It's like, oh, yeah, I wish we had some far-right prosecutor whose wife is an oil industry employee whose main upshot of his investigation has been the likelihood of a fascist getting elected. That would be great. I guess, granted, it happened last summer, so I guess Jimmy couldn't have predicted.
I voted for the candidate who had a Green New Deal, so I feel proud of myself about that because you're saying that that's a great way to get out of this. I agree.
I guess it's like that's my equivalent of like Jimmy saying that like the Supreme Court didn't matter for Sam. That's how you get me on a bender. Like, fucking Brazil. All right, we got to do the shout out. To the shout out, creepy, shout out, weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible.
I really get that Eminem now. Let's get down to business. I'm gonna tell you now. What is this? Must be a circus in town. Let's cut the shit down. Can I get a witness?
Creepy. It's really true. That's a good poem. Crazy. This is crazy. This is out of control. This is weird. Shout out. Bernie Sanders gave an excellent speech on foreign policy at Johns Hopkins. He spoke about confronting global oligarchy. He spoke about the march of Trump-inspired and Trump-synchronized authoritarianism. And he talked about the obscene amounts of money and corrupt relationships we had with regard to military spending and the implications for how we conduct our foreign policy. Here he is specifically talking about what needs to be done to stop the U.S., UK, UAE, Saudi mass murder in Yemen.
As an example, Saudi Arabia is a country, in my view, clearly in recent years inspired by Trump. Saudi Arabia, let us not forget, is a despotic dictatorship that does not tolerate dissent, that treats women as third-class citizens, and has spent the last several decades exporting an extremist form of Islam to countries around the world. Saudi Arabia is currently devastating the impoverished country of Yemen in a catastrophic war in alliance with the United States. And by the way, while we talk about Saudi Arabia, I would like to take a moment to note the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a critic of the Saudi government who was last seen entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, last Tuesday. Over the weekend, Turkish authorities told reporters that they now believe Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi consulate, murdered in a consulate, and that his body disposed of elsewhere. We need to know what happened here. If this is true, if the Saudi regime murdered a journalist critic in their own consulate, there must be accountability, and there must be an unequivocal condemnation by the United States.
And of course there won't be. We'll get to this later, but hilarious if it wasn't such a horrible story of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a very smart analyst. I would watch him on Al Jazeera. And what's amazing, and the message that they're actually sending to Saudi dissidents was horrifying, because this guy was a friendly critic. He was a critic inside the terms of the regime. Thomas Friedman has been trying to explain himself, and part of his explanation actually included a little bit of a spitting on the dead's grave, which was an interesting move by the old Friedster. But look, I'll also quote briefly from a write-up on CNN. This is Sanders. On one hand, we see a growing worldwide movement towards authoritarianism, oligarchy, and kleptocracy. On the other side, we see a movement towards strengthening democracy, egalitarianism, economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. He's exactly right. And what's so great about this, and what Daniel Bessner, who is, of course, essential for this stuff, touched on next week, and we're going to be doing some more work together, so look forward to that, is that the first step was this idea of responding to lazy Washington narratives. So Bernie doesn't have a foreign policy. You know, Hillary Clinton's advised by Henry Kissinger and has supported every single catastrophic invasion imaginable, but that's quote-unquote serious thinking. And what it started with was Bernie actually just making some incredibly modest criticisms of Israel, which are actually in line with what used to be official U.S. foreign policy with regards to the support for a two-state solution. And now he's expanded it with being an ardent defender of the Iran deal, which is Barack Obama's greatest accomplishment, which the Trump administration, all Republicans, have steadily and just sort of, even by their standards, mind-bendingly lied about. And more recently, and actually Jeremy Corbyn started to do this about a year ago, more forcefully, was really say that the global hoarding of wealth by a transnational elite who write trade deals in their favor, who have global tax havens set up, who are as everything from major corporations like Apple to even individuals like, say, Nawaz Sharif, former Pakistani prime minister, are hoarding the world's resources in increasingly interconnected and, yes, we could say actually structurally corrupt relationships. And that a task of a democratic, socialist, and humane politics is going to need to globally confront that, because our values need to be as mobile as their capital. So shout out to Bernie Sanders. What do we do now for the pitch in this new age of YouTube authoritarianism? These guys, real asshole rules from YouTube on everything now.
Yeah, they're coming for us.
Totally not good. It was all fun and games when they were just trying to undermine Pandora. But now
that is how that works.
Totally
People should
how
know.
It works.
Like,
explain that.
Well, they'll act as if they didn't have the capability to monitor and make sure we couldn't play.
There's no way that Google, as one of the most advanced technological enterprises on the planet, had basic robotic software to read music. Of course not. Sure.
Yeah. So like when we would put something like this underneath for longer than that, they knew that we were doing stuff like that, but it made our product better, and our product was on their product, and so they would allow that because it would keep us off of other people's attention.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's a war for attention basically. So keep as many people on YouTube as much as possible if you can't make money off of it, and then when you can start making money off of it, you switch on the algorithm that can test for copyright.
It's the attention economy. It's incredible. It's like literally technology that really could be like cooked up in a fucking dorm room. And they're like, oh, we couldn't do it.
And that's the annoying thing about this is
they're so disingenuous.
And thankfully, we're kind of leaving this, but not soon enough. Where Google's helping China censor stuff just on a massive scale to a point where, you know, if we still had a Cold War, I think Taibbi was making this point, we would maybe be outraged by it, but now it's like, whatever, we got other shit to worry about. So the Don't Be Evil company is now helping evil on a scale in terms of just raw numbers of people unparalleled in history.
Yeah. I think they discreetly stopped using that tagline a while ago. Guys, it's time to become a member. It's time to become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show. We just give you a massive amount of extra content. Illicit histories, idea primers, recent ones, the rise, fall, and rise again of the global super elite with Megan Day, maple washing, the real politics of Canada, obviously the deep dives on Brazil, South Africa, Jamaica this week, the origins of the Civil War in the Great Lakes region in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and also a primer introduction to Patrice Lumumba with one of our great crew members and regulars, Milton Alamati. There's calls with me at the 21 and above level. There's a thriving and active Discord community. There, of course, is Woke Bros is another sort of joint venture out. There's a huge amount of content, and we love being accountable to you. And only you. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Join today. We are circling. We see that 2,000 goal in our horizons, and we're very excited about it. So do it today. It's time for another edition of Regulate with Matt Lech. Boop, 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 boop. What is that music? Oh.
I'm just enjoying some music.
That would be funny if you should find some copyright free reggaeton for yourself. That would be good.
So today we're discussing a match made in somewhere. Steven Crowder and Prager University talking about Columbus Day.
Oh, okay. That's rich. That's a rich vein.
Yeah, so I don't know if Steven Crowder is an adjunct professor at Prager University or what he's doing there, but we're going to play him. He's going to give a little spiel on Columbus being an expert navigator, and then we're going to, look at the history of that. So
sounds about right.
As far as Columbus goes, the guy deserves some credit. Right? Flawed, to be sure, but he was the greatest navigator of his age, the first person to cross the Atlantic from the continent of Europe, and he did so without any maps and only 3 small ships. If you can name them, by the way, comment below, as I'm sure your professor can't. But your professor probably has taught you the tale of Columbus as a villain, usually as a starting off point to indict the United States as a whole, often relying on a few key myths and some pivotal lies by omission.
All right.
And now we answer to the distinguished the chair of not gay shirts at PragerU.
Yeah. So Alan Taylor, who's a author, historian, I'm a big fan of. He wrote American Colonies, the Settling of North America. He wrote this about good old Columbus.
And geographers had determined that the world had a circumference of about 24,000 miles, which suggested that Asia lay about 10,000 to 12,000 miles west from Europe. 15th century European ships were too small to carry enough water and food to sustain their crews on a 10,000-mile voyage beyond contact with land. Breaking with geographic orthodoxy, Columbus dared the westward trip to Asia because he underestimated the world's circumference as only 18,000 miles, which placed Japan a mere 3,500 miles west of Europe. In other words, a critical and potentially fatal mistake in calculations inspired his eccentric confidence that he could sail westward.
So he deserves some credit, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, basically for being a nutcase.
Right. So I like this. You're not doing the usual move, which is like, hey, maybe we shouldn't honor this guy because he arrived in the Americas and immediately started torturing and murdering people and putting them into bondage. You're saying, let's do, by your logic, that this guy, whatever else you say about him, is a super good navigator. And
turns out not even
not
that's
so
true. Yeah.
Not so much.
He was just kind of a lunatic Catholic.
Yeah,
that,
he was actually just a delusional fucking idiot.
He wanted riches. And, there's probably a bunch of other guys that also made similar misjudgment and then just died at sea. And we don't have days for them because why would we?
Lucky for the natives. Yeah. Mamma mia. I want to go to an Asia. India, have the gold.
What an idiot. He thought Japan was 3,000 miles off the coast of England.
By the way, I love that.
Just imagine that.
Like, what an idiot.
What an
idiot.
idiot.
This, like, Columbus gets dunked on by frat bros. That's fucking great. Columbus was such an... Oh, wait, no, that's the O'Reilly.
That's the O'Reilly on Hitler.
Columbus.
Hitler was such an idiot.
Columbus, who was such an idiot... Do you have that?
In 1920, in the miracle of this...
Jesus. Trump is just invading. All right, we got to move because the great Alex Pareene is going to join us in a few minutes. But first, David Griscom, talk to us. Professor Richard Wolff says on site every time he hears that the enterprising young Marxist is talking about economics on a podcast. He's also I'm seeing Richard Wolff next week in Idaho at the Jordan Peterson conference, and he says, "I will fucking kill you, David Griscom." All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about moronic technocrats and how they're allowing for more right-wing fascist movements to prosper. So recently, there's been a pretty big confrontation that's been going on between Italy's new government and the EU. Specifically, as members of the EU, there are certain rules about the amount of spending and the deficit that you can run as an economy. And the new ruling party has said that they're going to increase the public deficit target for 2019 to 2.4% of GDP, which is 3 times higher than the previous government has pledged.
Okay.
So the EU and the Five Star Movement folks have been butting heads about this, specifically because it's pushing itself way outside of the targets that are set up by the EU. And here's the reality of it, is that to not have to cut further programs within Italy does need to increase its spending. And to be able to do that, it needs to sort of break the rules of the EU. And this is exactly the same kind of thing that was happening in Greece a while ago, where basically these kind of archaic rules that exist in the EU are enforced very bullheadishly. Now, what we're seeing even more than that is, unlike Greece, Italy is the EU's 3rd largest economy. So this is a pretty significant blow. So significant that this is the kind of thing that could unravel the entire European Union project, as this anti-EU party and organization is now in the head of Italy's economy, and now they're having this kind of serious dispute. And I just wanted to say for a second, we should remember that while this organization is fighting against absolutely absurd rule, it's just emboldening the far right to take a position that any sensible left or even centrist party should be taking when it comes to the EU, which is that you need to get rid of a lot of these rules that really suffocate economies. Now you're looking at what's going to happen, because what happens is now you have these anti-establishment, xenophobic, racist, thuggish organizations that come in and they take over. And look what they're trying to do. They're trying to, for example, put in a universal basic income in Italy as part of the spending package. And the finance minister of Italy has said, well, we can implement austerity now because we'll be able to cut all of our welfare programs with our UBI program. So which is
always how, I will say though, this is what those of us on the left always say is the big danger.
No, I mean, exactly. So it's like, this is what happens, is that you have a very real problem, which is that the EU creates a lot of, structural issues within different economies, especially so far what we've seen within Southern European economies. And the fact that Germany will not budge on the requirements, basically, for a lot of these other economies to be able to, act like any normal economy. Because the fact about Italy is that the majority of their debt, even though it's very high, it's about 131% of GDP in Italy, the majority of that debt is actually held by Italians. Italy is an export economy mainly, actually very similar to another nation, Japan. And if Italy was able to follow simple kind of economic policy as they have in Japan, for example, they wouldn't have this problem. They have this problem solely because of the European Union's rules. And without finding any kind of leeway, not just for Italy, but for the rest of the nations in the EU, we're going to continue to see these problems in the European Union. And, you know, it's one of those things that you have to just sit there and scratch your head to wonder about the past 10 years, 15 years of the technocratic solution for the European Union, because all that it has done has emboldened the most vile, reactionary, xenophobic right wing while demolishing any kind of sensible left wing alternative. You know, so, you know, we're definitely going to be watching this very closely. They've put forward their draft budget. It's very likely that the EU is going to reject it, and we'll see what happens at the end of the month with this. And certainly we'll keep everyone updated.
Definitely. That's something we'll be following closely as part. And I also want to recommend people, if you haven't yet, go back into the Illicit History Archives with Mark Botenga, as a Belgian socialist. We did a deep dive on what a 21st century labor socialist politics would mean for democratizing the EU. That was very interesting. I'd go back because, I mean, we definitely have a lot of new patrons since then. That was several months ago. That was a really, really good conversation. All right. Do we have something that we can use for a brief break, Matt? Even in this new authoritarian world. Okay. We'll be right back with Alex Pareene. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. The crew is here. Joining us is the great Alex Pareene. He is a journalist, writer. I'm sure many of you know who he is.
I hope so.
I think so. I definitely think there's a big crossover. Thanks. This is the second time you're doing it. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Really
I'm happy
appreciate it. And I apologize for the lack of beverages.
It's fine.
We usually do a better job of stacking up, but today
I was going to get myself a LaCroix and I forgot to get it, and instead I'm drinking one beer I found in the fridge.
One sad American beer.
Yeah.
What was is LaCroix actually good?
No, it's not. So when I was growing up, this is the thing about LaCroix. I'm from the Midwest. When I was growing up, it was the supermarket brand. It was like the cheap generic soda.
Right.
If like you didn't want to get the Seagrams or the Canada Dry, your mom would get the LaCroix, and it was the cheap brand. And to see it become the East Coast hipster seltzer has been a little surreal, but anyway, it's fine. I would say LaCroix is fine, would be my review of LaCroix. If you like bubbly water with a sort of hint of artificial flavoring, it's just as good as any other.
I like how you still say it in you're still ad-manning it, though, so it must not be that bad. You're like, it's fine.
I think, honestly, my favorite is Polar. I'm going to say they're not paying me, but if they want to pay me, they can just Google me. But
I'm going to need my board for that. Polar. I think you need to justify that.
I like I think you get a more consistent bubbliness with the straight Polar than you do with the LaCroix. I think it's generally more carbonated, which is what I'm looking for in a seltzer.
You know, you would love going to Turkey. The brand that I remember that it was so carbonated. I loved it.
Yeah,
I like it too. It will literally almost burn your throat.
That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
You felt like you were drinking glacier. It was really intense. I don't remember that it was some local Turkish brand, but that must be that is probably some good at the Miami ad school. That's probably a good. Whoever did that, I don't know, Gray or Wyden Kennedy or somebody, they really did probably just get some room of 20 and 30 somethings. We're just what if LaCroix was actually we're going to take it from the past, not to now, but the future.
Yeah.
and they did it because you see it everywhere. I mean, that definitely, because I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
I actually thought it was just some new silly gimmick with good packaging. I didn't know it had a history.
It just came from Michigan in the 90s, and then I think the key was that they didn't update their packaging for many years until it came around to 90s retro. So there you go. There's a little tip for all you beverage manufacturers out there.
It came out of nowhere, I feel like, and then before I could try some, the CEO got in a Me Too scandal.
I missed that one. I completely missed that one.
He got sued. He's got sued. Apparently 2 pilots are suing him for inappropriately touching them on the airplane.
Oh my God.
Wait, he just went...
Don't do that to your pilot.
Yeah, unless...
you have a death wish.
I don't understand. No one signs NDAs anymore.
All right.
All right, well, I think we just did a little brand toxification right here.
Tie a bow on that.
Goodbye. So you won't be trying it tonight if you haven't tried it yet. I had it once at some party or something. I thought it was absolutely like, why is this a thing?
I don't know.
If I'm drinking something out of a can, it's going to be Coke or Pepsi, probably. I'm boring like that.
Yeah.
Like if I drink, I'm like, you forgot some of the ingredients out of this. Clearly.
Yeah. So there's also supposed to be a massive amount of sugar
and
artificial
syrup.
coloring.
I think that I remember the very first time. So like, you know, growing up, like the normal American, like growing up, like every time we went to McDonald's, I got soda, you got Sprite, you got 7-Up, and it was like, these are normal things to give a child. And the first time I went to my friend's house who had hippie parents, and I knew, like, eventually I knew a bunch of people with hippie parents, but I finally went to my first hippie parents' house.
Right.
I opened their fridge and was like, this seltzer has no flavors. I was like, what is this? What this pop has no sugar. Like, what are you forcing your child to drink?
That is actually, I remember that as very much like literally not only my parents hippie in that way. That was basically like, you know, I never had like curfews or anything, but if there was one rule, it was like you have to eat some type of horrifying macrobiotic regimen.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like, but
they were lax about they were lax about most things you put in your body except like sugar and processed foods.
They were actually to their credit, they were pretty across the board on that one. Although I definitely knew that would be really funny. Like, I'm not like, whatever. I'm not, weed is weed. But it is pretty funny to meet parents who would be like, that has a lot of artificial coloring.
Yeah.
Hey, man, can I get a hit off of that? Yeah. Like, literally bumming weed from their 14-year-old. Like,
yeah. Those
like
parents,
that was in the area I grew up
exist.
in. You smoked the parents out. It's like, you don't have any? Come on, what the fuck, man? No, I told you why we don't go to Subway. There's a lot of chemicals in that. Jesus Christ. No, I remember I remember there was this, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but there was like one house which, like, in retrospect, they were like, these parents were unbelievably friendly and tolerant because they had almost like they had like a heist, like they literally, like, this freezer was stocked with Ben and Jerry's. There was an unbelievable amount of weed.
Yeah.
There was like a pool. There was, I mean, and they just let us until like, I remember one kid tried to bike in the swimming pool.
Right. That was
like finally like, you know what?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out.
And they discovered that.
Of course, like back then, you're just like, hey man, what's the problem? But in retrospect, you're like, you guys were so, like, we're literally like, paintings got broken off of the wall. There's no way you could have gotten any sleep.
That is the like number one like teenage feeling that it's impossible to recapture is that feeling of like, why didn't they let me do whatever I want all the time? Like, why were they upset if I was like wandering the city at 3 a.m. with my friends?
What's the
Kavanaugh
problem?
reminded me of that attitude, actually.
Yes, because
that's a good bridge.
That's fucking Beach Week. That was Beach Week. It was it was completely. I mean, yeah. If we want to talk about that,
you sprung this on me, and I was a good student on the basketball team.
I lifted weights, and now you just hit me up with this. Like, I'm sure, like, she's nice, whatever. Like, fuck, I don't care. Fuck you. Fuck you, Amy Klobuchar. What? Do you drink? That was the one that really.
That was. Oh my god.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I do want you to, I mean, let's play this clip, this Trump thing first, and then you can, because before we get among our several themes tonight, the main thing is going to be what would the Democratic Party look like if it actually wanted to win, which I definitely want your thoughts on. But first, we'll tee off on this Kavanaugh situation. This is Donald Trump at the. Yeah, I mean, this
ceremonial swearing.
This literally is, yeah. And I just want to say, actually, in keeping with tonight's theme of like maybe, well, not the real enemy, but the near enemy and the facilitator of all of this, whether we're talking about Enrique Cardozo in Brazil, Brett Kavanaugh, okay, serious, credible accusations. We already know ultra far right, extreme ideological justice. There's multiple complaints about him that have been forwarded to John Roberts, and he tantrumed and lied all over the place at the committee. We know all this. And then Donald Trump, we know, is Donald Trump. There's a guy standing here. I don't know if he's in frame, but I'm sure he was at this ceremony. Named Anthony Kennedy, who, people like Andrew Sullivan are still writing, if only the right could be like Anthony Kennedy, who literally, in addition to his own voting record of scrapping voting rights, destroying labor unions, unchaining a whole other funnel of ways of getting dark money into politics, set all this up to happen by retiring. Yeah. And some reports I've heard specifically wanted Brett Kavanaugh as his replacement.
Yep.
So just bear that in mind as you think of, spare some contempt for Anthony Kennedy here in one of the most contemptible frames in human existence we're about to see.
I would like to begin tonight's proceeding differently than perhaps any other event of such magnitude. On behalf of our nation, I want to apologize to Brett and the entire Kavanaugh family for the terrible pain and suffering you have been forced to endure. Those who step forward to serve our country deserve a fair and dignified evaluation.
Yeah,
not a campaign of political and personal destruction based on lies and deception. What happened to the Kavanaugh family violates every notion of fairness, decency, and due process. Our country, a man or a woman, must always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. And with that, I must state that you, sir, under historic scrutiny, were proven innocent. Thank you.
Jesus Christ! All right, Alex, go ahead.
I had not watched that yet. I read the story.
Sorry.
I read the quote, but I had been avoiding watching it. And
Sorry.
Jesus Christ. So the Kennedy thing. I mean, yeah, he picked this guy. I mean, I think Trump picked him partly because of the executives are immune to prosecution angle. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Kennedy.
It's like when you're an executive, it's like beach week for life.
Yeah, exactly. It's beach term.
How do you say beach week in Latin?
Beachius studio persidum, which I learned at Yale while I was fucking studying hard without any help getting in there from anyone. Fuck.
But it's I don't know. It's just like what strikes me is just the going through the motionsness of the like having to proclaim these things that are patently false.
Right.
And they just do it like just out of dominance politics, not because anyone believes it. Like they don't believe it, we don't believe it, he doesn't believe it. It's just pure like you can't do anything about it, so I'm just gonna say this shit.
Right.
But I bet the underlying theme of the entire thing was that like you will not ever hold us accountable for anything. That's the message. It's like it's not going to happen. You're not going to hold us accountable. Like we're just going to win. You're not going to hold us accountable.
Yeah. I mean, and this is actually, I'm going to get to this a little bit earlier because we can bridge this also when we get to this Mitch McConnell clip in a minute, but I do want to read this. Usually we take Discord questions in the, yeah, I think that's actually a fair point, Matt. Maybe we do the Hillary convo instead of McConnell. But I want to get to this question. Usually we do Discord questions in the post game, but this one came up, and I think it fits into what you're saying perfectly. And this is from Transylvania Express. Alex, I recently reread your piece on how the long, lucrative right-wing grift is now blowing up in all of our faces, and it holds up as well as the day it was published.
Thank you.
And he did ask what you're working on now. Maybe you can touch on that. We can get to that even more in depth later. But how does that fit? I mean, remind us basically of that long right wing. That was, I think, one of the most important pieces that came out that explained Trump and everything that's happening.
So let's. I will try to use maybe Anthony Kennedy as an example of this. The basic thrust of it, and this is how I've been sort of understanding the right for a while now, is that the original sort of point of building a parallel media. And all these other parallel institutions was to whip up the base, make them stop paying attention to and stop trusting the mainstream media, and then eventually make them like ignore facts that are inconvenient to the right. So that's, you know, Fox News was designed to lie to the rubes, just like Rush Limbaugh was out there to like tell the rubes what they needed to hear to get out and vote for Republicans. Then basically, over the course of a couple decades, like the Republicans stopped being the cynical manipulators and started being the people being manipulated themselves. And it's a closed circuit now. It's a completely closed circuit. And Trump is a guy who sort of started off very clearly, nakedly, cynically pretending to be a right-wing populist because he thought that was the way to get ahead. And he had quotes in the 2000s when he was more lucid where he would basically be like, you know, you want to run like Pat Buchanan because then the crazies will vote for you. That's the way to get ahead in the Republican Party. So it all seemed like birtherism for him was, I think, originally done as this sort of like intentionally cynical campaign to build up his profile on the right.
Right.
But the other thing that happened is that
there's also those 2012, some of Mitt Romney's people tried to dig this up in the primary where they said, you know, supposedly he would say, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember but he would say stuff to them like, you got to talk about, you know, something like birtherism because the idiots love that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Almost like literal quotes.
Yeah, like there are a lot of people have heard him saying things but I think it's pretty clear now that we have a guy who like has just become addicted to this shit and no longer views it from. So this Donald Trump used to, you know, he read the newspaper every day. I know he was reading it to see if he was in it, but he read the New York Times, he read the New York Post, and he read the New York Daily News. That's a decent way to sort of know what's going on in the world. Now he DVRs Fox and Friends and watches Fox and Friends and believes what his Fox and Friends are telling him.
Right.
So that is like, that's one man's sort of journey into like being originally someone trying to sell snake oil to a like consumer of snake oil, and that happened.
Even Susan Collins, right?
Right.
I mean, Susan Collins is a great example of that because I mean, obviously, I don't like and you don't like.
Right.
No one has ever liked on Susan Collins, and she's not a moderate. That's a, you know, the scale of rightward shift of American politics is awe-inspiring. So, you know, moderates here, ultra to the right, but even watching her give that statement was like, whoa.
Right.
Like, I thought she was just some, like, right-wing hack negotiating keeping a seat in Maine.
Yeah.
But you watch that, you're like, oh,
yeah,
she's another one. She's crazy, too.
Yeah. And
like, maybe Lisa Murkowski's the only one in that caucus that isn't, that's just, you know, right-wing business peddler. And not actually crazy.
I think that's true. And so when people talk about Anthony Kennedy, especially how he ended his tenure on the court, he suddenly lurched to the right, made a string of very right-wing decisions, retired to let Donald Trump replace him, and maybe chose partisan warrior Brett Kavanaugh, maybe, or had some hand in choosing him. So, like, Anthony Kennedy, like, what do we know about his demographic profile? We know he is an old white conservative guy. So do you think, like, Anthony Kennedy's media diet in 1990 is the same as Anthony Kennedy's media diet in 2018?
Right.
I think this guy, just like everyone else in his demographic group, has been mainlining Fox News for however many years. I think it poisoned his brain just like it poisoned everyone else's brain.
Right.
And so this is what I mean. There aren't serious grown-ups in the GOP anymore because they are the consumers of their own bullshit machine. They invented a bullshit machine. Now they cannot, like, understand the world outside of it. And so in Congress right now, and it's getting, you know, every day, like, old Republicans who actually read the real news are being replaced with these people who grew up on this new shit that bears no resemblance to reality.
Right.
And that so if you want to know, like, oh, how can they act like this? How can they be so crazy? It's like they built a machine that drove themselves crazy.
Right. So what is it? And I could tell you. I mean, even just I've had that anecdotally validated.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right. Like, even just in conversations that, like, you know, very, very, like, super sophisticated, objective, like, smart people, not dumb people, whatever. But whatever we mean by that, I guess I mean, like, people who, you know, people who are able to think.
Right.
In the broadest possible sense. And what maybe 2 or 3 years ago they might have explained cynically or tried to draw some ludicrous false equivalency with, but not actually defended.
Right.
Now they're with like, oh yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's a deep state.
I mean, the story that the anti-Kavanaugh protesters were orchestrated by Soros and Acorn, everyone's like, oh, Trump started saying that because he heard it on Fox. It was in the National fucking Review. It was,
Right.
it was in the
a National Review piece.
piece.
And Chuck Grassley said it. And
Yeah.
Chuck Grassley, who, I mean, my
yeah.
God, I mean, he's gone in every way. But I mean, he would be a classic example of, you know, an ABC news package would love to still present like, you know, and Chuck Grassley, a veteran, respected senator,
Yeah.
who's just like this misogynist, grouchy old lunatic who
Yeah.
just said like, if there wasn't a goddamn Jew writing Taylor Swift's Instagram posts and paying these women to protest, this would have been a civilized process, right?
Yeah.
Like which is insane.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why the Kavanaugh thing was so clarifying, because you got to see the never Trumpers on Twitter going on long threads rationalizing like, well, how much line can I look past?
Yeah, like how far can I go?
Yeah.
And you like the way they coalesced around well, at first they let Whelan go out there with the wrong guy story, and then when everyone thought that was ridiculous, they sort of threw him under the bus. And then they were like, after that, they were just like, actually, you know what, we're going to go with this.
Yeah,
we
I was gonna say that was awesome.
Yeah,
in that
they were
sense.
like, we don't have a better. We have
first,
no
let's
better
cut
story.
this guy adrift.
Yeah,
but then a week later, Susan Collins
is like, you know
I'm
what?
sure it happened, but it was a
must have been-
different guy.
Yeah, you know, we're just going to go with a much vaguer version of the
Yeah.
story. We find that
Right.
convincing.
As long as you're not too specific, multiple people works. First of all, has anybody ever seen Inception? George Soros funded that movie. I'm quite convinced that Brett won't overturn Roe, or at least he won't do it in a way that will make me look bad.
But yeah, I think with Collins too, you saw like the politics of it for her were that she like gets pleasure out of like sticking it to the people protesting her, basically.
Totally.
Like, and it's which makes her no different from any other right winger. Well, like I said, it's just
owning the libs.
It is. It's about owning the libs.
Right.
But you have to. My understanding of Collins has been for a long time. Like, I don't think ideologically, I don't think she really gives a shit. I don't think she's not a committed. She's like, I don't care. Ideologically, who gives a shit? She's a deeply partisan. She cares about the Republican Party.
Yep.
She's like a deeply, deeply partisan, as much as Mitch McConnell. And that's why she's one of Mitch's, like, closest allies.
Right.
And her moderation is just like, you know, my personal politics are, I don't care what the tax rate is, but my real politics are whatever will help Republicans win.
Yes. No, that's funny because again, it's another way in which like all of these terms, like, yeah, she's pro-choice, and because of her profile and because of the electorate of Maine, she's occasionally going to be like, guys,
yeah, like back off.
I can't, you know, just go and vote to strip tens of millions off of healthcare, especially when a not insignificant portion of them, I need to actually keep sending me here. Right. But like, yeah, but there's nothing.
But if she'd have been the deciding vote on that, she would have fallen in line, because
I think that's
only
true. Yes.
only when she has cover does she vote no. When she has to have cover, and like that was what this time it was too important for her to, like, even if Murkowski gave her cover, it was too important to the party, so she fell in line.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. So then, well, what about then? I mean, it's different, but there is you know, there's like the alt center or the delusional center or whatever we want to call it of every. I mean, it's a kind of amorphous category, which I would include like everybody from like Thomas Friedman to even like to Sam Harris in some ways, where of like in the face of this just raw predatory power politics.
Yeah.
There's everything from, well, what we really need to do is recapture, you know, some strategy memo that Dick Morris wrote in 1994, and that will save us, to, you know, well, you just keep fighting with facts, and what's really going to fucking electrify people is when you go out on the campaign trail and you say, we're going to propose that no court nominee gets confirmed without 75 votes, because by golly, we need, you know, things to work again in this country.
Actually, a proposal like that would actually be hilarious because I'm now in favor of this. So you can't confirm anyone to the Supreme Court without 75 votes.
Yeah, right.
Which means as they die off, they're not replaced. There's literally, we just eliminate the Supreme Court over time.
Is the right reason to
That
support
act would be that no one can get anyone
There's
confirmed.
a left centrist alliance we could get behind. Like, I totally support gradually letting the Supreme Court die.
Yes.
Although,
well,
what happens whenever like Kavanaugh's the last one?
He's the last guy.
He's just like
Just
pounding like PBR, like, go ahead, hit me. Oh, you got fired because you needed to use the bathroom. Fuck you. And by the way, Amazon owns everything. I wrote it.
That's the flaw.
Get the fuck out.
That's the flaw in it right now. But I do think, maybe.
Oh, wow, this Dominican guy was arrested without a proper check and then was beaten, and now we would like the police department to apologize. You know what? I'm going to really think about that.
Look, the way this plan
really think about that.
The way this plan works is if like Kagan and Sotomayor are always buying him drinks. Like, it's just like, you want another whiskey, Brett? And then 30 years from now, his liver's dead, and he's.
Let's hope for a much shorter horizon on that. I publicly, I don't care what here's the future of the Democrat. Here's the Democratic Party that's committed to winning. I absolutely hope. I mean, look. Let's not say death, but I totally hope that Brett Kavanaugh's liver or whatever, it's at some point it's going to be time to spend more time with the fam. It's a hard schedule to sit there.
He is a father.
He's a father.
Daughters.
What about I have daughters? Whoa, what happened? Did we just blow out?
Yeah, you can't yell into that mic.
Oh my God! Sorry, guys.
Can't yell into that mic.
Can't. So I learned.
If only Brett Kavanaugh had been given that mic at his hearing.
Right. That would have been great if he popped an eardrum. I have daughters. I have a basketball team to coach. Let's actually, I don't know if you've seen it, but I want to play this Hillary Clinton clip. It's kind of making the rounds. Also, it's recently announced that her and Bill are going on tour. Just like, thanks, guys. Could you? I'm at the point with the Clintons where it's like, could you just wait till after people vote?
I mean, now that Lindsey Buckingham is back out of Fleetwood Mac, this is the time for them to get those boomer dollars.
But just wait a fucking month. Like, just I get it. Like, you guys need to like wring an unending amount of money out of, this new weird group of people that follows you. Like, you're probably bored sitting around Chappaqua, but like, could you just wait till after the fucking midterms? That's literally, at this point, my expectations are so reduced. That's all I'm asking. But this is Hillary Clinton talking about civility, and I have thoughts on this, obviously, but I want you to tee off on this, Alex.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about. That's why I believe if we are fortunate enough to win back the House and/or the Senate, that's when civility can start again. But until then, the only thing that the Republicans seem to recognize and respect is strength. And you heard how the Republican members, led by Mitch McConnell, the president, really demeaned the confirmation process, insulted and attacked not only Dr. Ford, but women who were speaking out. Look, I remember Republican operatives shutting down the voting in Florida in 2000. I remember the swift voting of John Kerry. I remember the things that even the Republican Party did to John McCain in 2000. I remember
I remember all of these things that totally worked.
Yeah, they did.
Keep going.
It worked really well.
Right.
To me, for 25 years, the falsehoods, the lies, which unfortunately people believe because the Republicans have put a lot of time, money, and effort in promoting them. So when you're dealing with an ideological party that is driven by the lust for power, that is funded by corporate interests who want a government that does its bidding, it's hard. You can be civil, but you can't overcome what they intend to do unless you win elections.
Okay, Alex, yeah.
I mean, she's got a diagnosis of the problem that resembles reality, like her.
Right.
And I think say what you will about the Clintons, they were, regardless of how their politics work, because their politics were about triangulation and all that, they were realistic about what the Republicans were after and how they worked, because they considered themselves to be the victims of unprecedented, like, attacks and dirty tricks by Republicans. So I think, like, Hillary Clinton, unfortunately, her political instincts tell her not to be honest with voters about that, and her political instincts tell her, like, look, we let's be civil after we win the election. But I don't know. I think that what she's sort of saying is like, I don't know what let's be civil after we win the election means.
Well, that's what really. Well,
I don't know what that means.
That's what really concerns me about that clip, because, and not just because, like, I get it. We have different. I mean, look, let's be honest about some of the stuff. There's different brand positioning. So we're fucking young guys with the fucking. We're dirtbag left, writer, podcasters. So we're supposed to be like, nah, fuck civility, blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about, I don't even, again, I don't know it's so amorphous a term, but I understand basically that people in elected office are going to use different language and position things in a different way than I might, right? They're not going to make jokes about Brett Kavanaugh drinking himself out of his lifetime appointment to destroy people's lives in the Supreme Court. But conversely, it seems to me that, like, Democrats, partially for ideological and also partially because of their own, the contradictions of who funds campaigns and their own rightward tendencies in their party, that, they're going to need to start figuring out a way of governing that actually entrenches and reinforces their power.
Right.
Because that's what Republicans do. And so I'm concerned. So anyways, I mean, maybe you could, if Democrats actually wanted to win, what does that mean not only for the midterms, but actually, like, going forward? Like, if they actually reclaim power, what would that actually mean if they're like, hey, maybe we actually want to hang on to this instead of losing it every couple of years and throwing the country into an absolute crisis?
I mean, God, what does it mean? It's very tempting to just say, like, implement my entire ideological agenda. Although I sort of think that, like, that's what I would want them to do.
But aren't some of those things like voting rights from DC and Puerto Rico, right? Like,
yeah.
Isn't that like that's like, seems to me, or like a national civil rights voting rights package, like, right? Seems to me there are things like that,
I mean, there
right?
would be you could look at a package of things that would be like exactly national. So the Voting Rights Act, like, pre-clearance for everyone, not just the southern states, but like federal pre-clearance for all voting law changes for everyone. And there's like a lot of things that there should be a package that should be ready to go the day they take back power. That is basically universal, national universal registration, and weekend, like, move the elections to the weekends, and like all this other shit. Like, you could do a voting rights package overnight that would make registration and ballot access easier instantaneously. The stuff to sort of consolidate power, I mean, they like, this is why people are talking about court packing now. Right. Although I really think, like, the first thing they should be doing, this is going to be the test. The test will be, if they regain the House, do they begin investigating Kavanaugh seriously?
Right.
And that's the real test, because they really have no choice here. Like, there's a million different threads. It's not just the sexual assault. No one knows where his fucking debts went. Like, no one knows how he racked up the debts. Right. No one knows where they went. The story he told is ridiculous. And I think he got the kid glove treatment on that because there's like a gentleman's agreement in D.C. not to look at who's funding who.
Right.
But so, like, let's get his fucking financial records. So that's the test, because that doesn't need to wait for Democratic president. That doesn't need to wait for Democratic Senate. If they win the House, they can start investigating him, and they can bring him back, and they can ask him to account for the money. They can ask him to actually answer questions that he refused to answer, and all this other shit. And I think I look at there was a terrible Mother Jones piece.
Sounds about right.
That was like, it's a judicial or Supreme Court impeachment is a pipe dream. Like, give up. Like, don't even bother thinking about it, because it'll never happen in a million years. And within living memory, like in 1969, the Republicans kicked out a democratically appointed Supreme Court justice because basically they wanted to get rid of two of them, And then as a compromise, they got rid of one of them by threatening to impeach him.
Right.
And that was Abe Fortas, and they were going to go after him and Douglas, and then to save his other colleagues, they got rid of Fortas. So it happened within memory, and it could happen again. So if we want to talk about, like, is this a party that knows how to use power and wants to use power? That's like the very first test.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, like, well, before we get there, do you think they'll take the House? I mean, what's your sense of that?
I was feeling probably a little bit, I was more confident they would a few weeks ago, but I had this, this is not based on data, it's not based on polling. This is my gut pundit instinct. I'm being a complete hack right now.
I love it.
This is my complete hack pundit instinct. There was a sort of theory that, if the Supreme Court seat was open, that would drive Republicans to the polls and they'll turn out in larger numbers.
Yes.
And my conspiracy theory is that Chuck Schumer, I think probably before the accusations got more serious, I think he probably wanted to, like, rush the vote just to get this done. But I think that's the exact opposite of how it actually works, and I think that just, like, pure displays of dominance are what drives committed Republicans to be like, yes, we will reward you with our passion. And that's what this was. It was just a pure display of dominance. So I think that actually will, like, rather than Kavanaugh being defeated, the idea was Kavanaugh's defeated, Republicans turn out to the polls to make sure they get to confirm the next one. No, I think the actual alternate reality was Kavanaugh gets defeated, Republicans, like, throw a tantrum and stay home. So I think it's probably less likely today than it was a few weeks ago. But on the other hand, like, I remember 2006, and I remember election night being like, having been trained by the last few elections to have no hope ever.
Right.
On 2006, I just remember watching, like, oh, they just won everything. So that's possible. Like, it could be 2006 again.
What do you think? How does the movements fit into this, you think? Because it is interesting that, like, there is like heightened labor activity. There were all those people who did that amazing action on the ICE protests. There's people who, I mean, I don't know enough, obviously, just age-wise, about what happened in the Clarence Thomas era, but it did, like, at least media-wise, I think it totally works with their base. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's right. Orrin Hatch told them to shut up. You know, I think, and that's who they are, and that's what they're about. But I do think from a broader electorate perspective, it was like, oh, wow. You guys absolutely don't care about any of this shit. You're literally shutting down, civic-minded, like, people that I think would, positive adjectives, right, for trying to talk about their own experiences of sexual assault and concerns about this process and having this guy in the court. Do you... I wonder, like, do you think, like, because I think in general, I don't know what that relationship is in myself, but it does seem like even as part of that longer term picture, there does need to be this sort of continued mobilization.
Yeah. So there's so much energy around these movements, like, like new labor activity, all those other things. And this is old hat. This is not a new observation. But they need to have candidates who actually are trying to speak to that energy and harness it. And they need candidates who want that support, basically. And I think there are tendencies among the Democratic establishment, specifically in the DCCC and the DNC to an extent, to still be looking for the wealthy suburban moderate, and to be chasing the unicorn of the wealthy suburban moderate. So the question is, like, can this reinvigorated labor movement find, like, candidates who actually want its support? And I don't have enough of a granular view of every House race in the country to know about candidate quality in all these places. And I think there's actually a lot of really good ones out there.
Yeah.
I feel like I hear about some surprisingly good ones pretty regularly. But So when we talk about whether the Democrats want to hold power again, like their 2006, which I just brought up, swept in a wave of these Rahm Emanuel recruited candidates who like didn't actually want to do anything with power. You know, they didn't want to. Right. I don't think it's as bad this time around, but many of the same people were trying to find many of the same kinds of candidates. So I don't know.
Do you think that that's ideological, or is it? I mean, is it just as crude as like, you know, if you're a consultant in D.C. I mean, Ryan Grimm, I think, had the kind of perspective too that it's also just risk aversion, which is like, hey, if you keep getting rewarded with consulting contracts, no matter how much you lose, you still get those contracts. Whereas if you try something new and you lose, you might actually get. That's the way you might actually get blamed for it. So that's interesting. But I've been wondering, like, because I think this is really stark in the UK, right? Yeah. Because sometimes it's like some of these people are like, oh, I didn't know that we could actually do this. Yeah, this is kind of cool that we can do this because I actually do have pretty decent politics. Yeah. And then there's this, you know, there's a Tony Blair contingent where it's like, it isn't just money. I mean, ideologically, these people are very right wing. So that's what I'm wondering. You know, I mean, I think someone like Schumer seems to care about, you know, he cares about Israel and his, you know, donations. I don't think he really cares about much beyond that one way or another. Yeah.
I think it's the fact of the makeup of the consultant and election industry class. And it's not simply the ideology that these professional class people have that they got at elite schools or whatever. All of that is part of it. And it's why they want to recruit lawyers, and it's why they want to recruit professional class people. And it's the fact that Democrats need to find candidates who they think can self-fund and who can find people who can help them fund. That's actually just has an ideological effect, but it's actually just a practical response to our broken campaign finance system. Yeah. And the real sort of left-wing insurgents, the real work that they are trying to do institutionally is build an alternate funding system, because the current funding system only rewards certain kinds of candidates. But then that's just a practical effect of like how our laws have been shaped by right-wing courts going back decades. Right. But then, and then the other part of it is it's like any other corporate culture. It is just like I have all of my experience is in doing things this way. If this industry starts doing things another way, I will have to adapt or be out of a job. So I cannot let this industry do things another way. And that's how this cycle just gets perpetuated over and over again, because the same dozen firms and people are like hired for every Democratic race.
I remember the first articles I read, like when I read about political consultants were probably in 2004. And actually, in some ways, this guy might not even be the worst, although it's a pretty bad group. But I remember reading about this guy. Can't believe his name's totally escaping me right now. Bob Shrum.
Oh yeah, Bob Shrum. Yeah.
And it was just, but the big takeaway, and this is somebody you could look in some ways. You could look at his career and actually chart a certain modern history of the Democratic Party up until about, I think he quit after 2004. I think he did Kerry's campaign. He was the chief strategist on it, and he was done. But it was funny because it was like, you know, in 2004, all of the main candidates with money, like they all want this guy. This guy's considered to be the top shelf Democratic strategist. And it's like, and he's won all sorts of Senate and House races, and he's advised candidates in Bolivia and Israel and all of this. And it's like, and then he's done a bunch of U.S. presidential elections. Yeah. All of which he's lost.
He lost every single one of them.
He just lost. They were like, that's the dude we want. Yeah. That guy with a 0-7 record. That's who we want to pay millions of dollars in TV commissions on. For what purpose exactly? Almost to seem prestigious within your own social group.
If I can just use some extremely vulgar sports metaphors, it's like coaching jobs in any professional sports league, where it's like owners who are cowardly rich people are scared to hire unknown, so they go with known losers. Right. Like Jeff Fisher gets hired over and over and over again because he's a known loser with experience, and then no one wants to be the guy who hired the kid with no experience, and then you lose with the kid. If you lose with the veteran, you're like, well, hiring the veteran wasn't the problem because everyone vouched for him. But if you lose with the kid, it's like you just screwed up and hired some completely unknown person.
So if the Democratic Party was like a brand or a business, you'd say like, okay, so we have a risk-averse, insulated, self-dealing culture of consultants and people who don't want to take any risks and have no ideological vision. Then we have contradictions that it's like, it's not a unified party. There's all these different constituent components of it. But there is a fundamental contradiction between the people, basically the people who fund it and the people who lead it, and its prime social basis, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So overwhelming, like corporate money, wealthy people, then overwhelmingly women, people of color, and so on. That classic contradiction. And then number three, apparently there's still enough people that actually really think that like we're still living in like an op-ed in 1996.
Yes, yeah.
Is that like the three?
I think
Okay.
Yeah, that's my map of the territory. Yeah.
So does that mean Bloomberg 2020?
Yeah. I mean, God. It's going to be. There are going to be like completely unbelievable names coming out of the woodwork to run because everyone thinks it's wide open.
Head of Starbucks.
Yeah, Howard Schultz.
Yep.
So, but with the Bloomberg and the Schultz stuff, you got to remember, those are driven by people who want to get hired by them. Like Schultz.
Explain that to people because that is so true, and it's actually the only part of me that like I get a twinkle in my eye every time I see those articles because I'm like, I hope those guys get their fucking paydays.
No, seriously.
Awesome.
So
if I was a consultant, I'd love that gig.
So like Howard Schultz. The reason he thinks he can win is because he's surrounded by a bunch of people whispering to him that America is crying out for his brand of no-nonsense moderation. And they're whispering that to him because if he runs and hires them, they'll get to buy a house.
Right. Right.
If you are a completely cynical political consultant or pollster or campaign manager and you want a big payday, you got to convince a billionaire to hire you. And Bloomberg, when even just running for mayor of New York, made so many people rich that they spent years begging him to run for president. They just were begging him because if he ran for president, they would get to buy a nicer house.
America really needs you. America, in a very, very highly specified sense, needs you. It reminds me that I don't know if you remember, like a year ago, Bill Clinton wrote some like New York Times op-ed, and it was just, I don't even remember what the occasion was, but it was just but it literally was like if you change some of the company reference points, like because I think now it was Apple and Google and whatever, but it could have literally been like AOL is opening a information superhighway. Like you just feel like, wow, like these people's thought process has not.
Yeah.
At least like Tony Blair has kind of been like, oh, I'm adapting my thought process of like how I connect like Azerbaijani pipelines with Italian fascists. That's super 2018.
Yeah.
But like, there's a new information economy.
Yeah,
it's changing fundamentally how we live. And then when you think of Bloomberg and Schultz and that consulting class, I mean that's literally all it is. They're saying the same stuff, and it's like a privileged time capsule.
Right, and it's especially funny because their message in the 1990s was always like, these old Democrats haven't changed their message since the 40s.
Right.
And then like,
they're
like it hasn't been working since FDR's time. And now it's like, all right, then it'll be perpetually 1988 in your head.
Right. There's a company called Atari which are releasing new products fundamentally.
I love that was actually the Atari Democrats was the nickname for Al Gore. That was
literally what they called themselves.
Yeah, the Atari Democrats. And they have not... They're like nothing has changed about that class of Democrat ever since.
I'm really glad that iPhone government didn't stick. That was an early Obama era slogan.
Oh God!
With remember those nudge books? Those like you don't need regulation.
Yeah,
you just need to sort of weirdly try to behaviorally influence people through traffic lines.
Yeah, so
that's the future of progressive.
The ultimate
governance.
high point of that form of like technocracy was Obama passed one of the like largest and broadest tax cuts in the history of tax cuts when he gave every working American got a payroll tax cut that they purposefully didn't tell them about because Cass Sunstein said the economics of it suggest that it will work better if they don't know why their paychecks are bigger.
Oh,
so in Obama's
fuck you.
In Obama's first term,
Cass Sunstein sucks so
he
much.
passed a massive payroll tax cut, helped every working American, didn't run on it for the midterms, just didn't mention it. And,
remember, guys, if we talk about it, it will totally blow the effects.
So if you
That's
wanna,
one thing you got to give. I am sure Bill Clinton would have been like,
Bill
"Are you
Clinton
fucking
would have
kidding
been
me?"
shouting it from
yeah,
the
Bill Clinton,
rooftops.
like, every single American got a tax cut.
Yes.
Every single American. By the way, every single American. And incidentally, they don't want to tell you about every. Obama's just like, "Oh, if we campaign on this, apparently there's an econometrics measure in Illinois State that says this might make people buy one less Whopper a week." You got it. My lips are sealed.
And then the other thing about it was that it was temporary, and then when it expired a few years later,
it looked like an increase.
And then the right-wing media was like, "Oh, why is Obama raising your payroll taxes?"
Right. And Obama was like, "How can you guys be so intellectually dishonest?"
Yes, exactly.
This is totally not what being at Harvard Debate Club was like.
Did you not see the Pinocchios they got for this one? Like,
yeah, pretty sure that when the Pinocchio meter comes out, your average Midwest industrial state voter will get that it's bullshit. That's actually, in some ways, though, you have to say, like, Obama's unbelievable, like his personal charisma is that much more underscored by the fact that he actually could do things that were that breathtakingly stupid and still get away with it.
Yep, it is.
Like,
it's
people just really
remarkable.
like the guy because he's super likable, but he actually right,
especially that all those first term economic team fuck ups. Like, it's incredible. After all that, with the economy still crippled because they didn't actually finish fixing it. Like, his re-election was actually pretty remarkable looking back, and he would have won a third term. I strongly believe he would have
won a third term. Yeah. He would have cleaned up Trump. Let's touch, before we go to the post game, let's touch on the positive side for a second. Do you think, well, first of all, do you agree with me that there's actually really significant difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? Like, they're both generally, like, I like her, but I don't think they're the same.
No, they're not the same. I think even though I think eventually their platforms will look very similar, they're not the same temperamentally, and it's a question of background, really. And it's like what informs your politics a lot of it happens really early on. And I think Elizabeth Warren, she's brilliant. Her background is academic and not particularly left wing, and that means that even if she adopts all these sort of left wing things, like, the decision-making process she uses to come to these decisions is just very different from his, because his background is left-wing politics, like of the old-fashioned kind. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just saying that's a difference. That's a difference in their politics that will decide how they make decisions going forward. That's sort
but
of
I think he's actually, I mean, I'm not too attached to these terms in some ways, but I think he actually is some form of a socialist.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think she's I think she's a liberal with legit populist instincts, and I think, like, of everybody talking about running for president, for me, Bernie's definitely number one, and then it's her, and then there's a major drop down after you got to those two.
I mean,
but I do think those orientations are, there's a difference.
I think he probably eventually wants to end capitalism, and she probably eventually wants managed capitalism that actually works.
Right. And I think that also affects even, like, where he like we talked earlier about his foreign policy speech.
Yeah.
Like, he's starting to outline again, it's still a super moderate one, but like an actual global critique that has something to do with what's going on in Brazil, that has something to do with Israel-Palestine, that has something to do with, like, just raw international wealth theft.
So this is where I guess the difference lies, is that in having a socialist framework, even a democratic socialist framework, it gives them a framework to sort of think about those outside issues.
Yeah.
And Warren has to sort of come at those from scratch, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I remember, that's actually for a long time, I would always tell people, like, we don't know a damn thing about her foreign policy. Like, she hasn't said word one about it. It's just like, we just don't know what she believes. And I don't think she has any Like, I don't think she's said anything recently where I'm like, oh, that's a red flag. But like, we didn't know for a long time. Bernie didn't talk about it very much either for a long time. But you could have just sort of guessed.
You could know.
You could just guess based on
where the
politics.
guy's coming from.
Exactly.
It's not perfect, but it's like, it goes back to what you said before. What was he doing in the 80s?
Yeah.
He was doing Sandinista solidarity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's a classic thing. Like, Sandinistas are not perfect. Blah, 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 blah. You were supposed to support the Sandinistas in the 80s.
Yeah.
If you weren't supporting the Sandinistas in the 80s, like, you're fundamentally suspect in your politics.
You are.
Do you think that do you think they'll coordinate between each other and pick one, or what do you think will happen in terms of who runs?
I'm not sure. It's all like, I think that I don't think they will coordinate, and I don't know how much. I don't really know how much their staffs work together. I don't really know. It feels like if each one thinks they can win, they're gonna try.
Huh.
And then if and maybe they decide like that's actually gonna sort of split the vote and then screw everything up. So maybe then they come to some different arrangement. But I feel like they're at least gonna both try.
At the end of the day, and I really hope we don't leave the public show on a depressing note, but at the end of the day, does Joe Biden sweep the Democratic nomination?
No, he doesn't.
Okay.
He has he comes in and he's a lot like oh God, who was like some of the 2004 people who just like came in and did nothing. Anyway, he's not, because like all the energy, especially like all the energy is around either left-wing populists or young women, and
right.
so that's going to be where the energy is.
Right. Although, and the only thing I would say about Biden, and I will never, maybe there's 3 tiers, because he's actually probably like, I would go Bernie, Warren, and then I would totally vote for Kamala Harris or Cory Booker over Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But I do think if you were, and I don't think you should make decisions like this, but I think if you were purely in a resistance frame of mind, get rid of Trump is the number one thing, he would demolish Donald Trump, I think.
Biden?
I think, yeah.
Oh, he totally,
he
would. Yeah.
Wreck.
Yeah.
Donald
I mean,
Trump.
look at what he did VP presidential debates against Palin. It was like, yeah, this is the guy, because he does the old-fashioned Northeast politician thing of sort of projecting this form of like everyman authenticity that like you're like, oh, I forgot that for a second I forgot that you were like solely bankrolled by Delaware corporations that don't want to pay taxes.
I forgot for a second that you're the reason that my family can't get medical bankruptcy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, absolutely. In fact, that would be.
There was a funny thing I will say.
Yeah.
I will say one thing about Joe Biden, where if he does manage to be the nominee, where I would be less panicked than you might think, which is that for some reason his vice presidential team's economic team was better than Obama's.
Definitely.
He actually had a better economic team than Obama's, and if that is a signal of the sort of people he would hire if he got elected, I can't know that, but if that's a signal, I would not be panicking about him winning.
That's okay. So there's a silver lining, and he's probably not going to win anyways.
He's probably not going to win anyways.
And we all know that I should be the nominee anyways, you fucking pricks. How many foreign policy speeches I got to get before I get a straight fucking endorsement? Jesus Christ.
You know that
talking
story
about fucking Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about all sorts of fucking issues.
There's that story about Nixon and Kennedy when they're congressmen talking about how no one gives a shit about like boring domestic stuff. If
that's really funny.
If Bernie's just the opposite, is like, God, I'm so sick of talking about Yemen.
I get it. There's a cholera outbreak. Fuck. Well, that was the best thing about. I know I've talked about this before, but one of the funniest things when he was running for president and he gave his. I mean, it was sort of a foreign policy address, but it really was a Middle East address. And the funniest part to me was first, he's listing all of these things, which a frontline. I mean, they're obvious, but no frontline American politician had done, at least anytime recently, of just all of the objective barbarism of Israelis towards Palestinians, the Israeli government. So he's talking about civilian casualties, the occupation, and part of it I know is my comedic projection, but not 100%, because he's like, and then one of his stats was like, the unemployment rate in Gaza, and that clearly got like the most. It's just like, and the unemployment rate in Gaza. Oh my God, I can't say anything. Mike, fuck, is there what? I will stay a bit off of it, but that's never happened before. Well, not to me. I haven't heard it. I'm hearing it. It's sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry, everybody. But yeah, that was really. He was like the unemployment rate in Gaza is unacceptable. He really did seem to say it with a lot more passion. Like, look at white phosphorus dropped on them, and they don't have freedom of movement, but they don't get organize a goddamn labor union. That was like clearly like somebody showed him that stat. He was like, I can't be progressive except in Palestine anymore. Like that does not work. All right, guys, we're going to go to the post game. We have a ton of questions from the Discord. We'll get to some phone calls. We have a lot more sound to get to as well, including, I think, some Mitch McConnell sound that will be right in line with everything you've been saying about this dominance politics stuff.
Mitch McConnell messes with the wrong history nerd on the Sunday shows.
He does. John Dickerson and I can't even say rare form. I would say never form. I've never seen him actually be like that before. It was pretty good. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, David Slavic. Thanks for being here, Alex Pareene. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
And thanks for staying with us to the post game. Become a patron today, patreon.com/TMBS. We're getting very close to that 2,000 mark. Thanks, everybody. Oh, this weekend, Illicit History with Milton Alamati on the Great Lakes region, the Congo Civil War, and Woke Bros. The live show is going out on Thursday from the Bell House that we did on Friday. Thanks.